What do you think is the biggest hype about AI that people are talking about? And every time you see it, you feel this is not the right direction.
I'm going to say something reasonably controversial. People are saying 2024 will be the year of
Donald Taylor, lead researcher and Global Sentiment Survey.
People are saying 2024 will be the year of AGI, artificial general intelligence. It's just like a human being, but smarter. I am deeply skeptical that this is attainable, and I can't explain why. I would say firstly, though, that intelligence is very difficult to define. It may be impossible to say if we ever reach AGI. The view of what machines can do has been altered by the large language models we've come across. They clearly do things which are extraordinary, but they are not exhibiting anything like consciousness or the ability to think sensibly about something. At the moment, the feeling is if we give it enough data, if we give it enough processing power, we can create AGI. I am deeply skeptical we'll ever get there. We're on a curve that's getting closer and closer and closer to the line of AGI, but we'll never actually reach it. And that gap between where we are and human level general intelligence, that gap is where human beings make the difference and provide the differentiation.
Don, so good to have you. Thanks for joining today. As you know, I've heard about you a lot through the Emerge Education Group, and when we finally got connected in March, I was so excited. I've been lurking on LinkedIn, following your great content. Anyways, thanks for joining.
Look, it's great to be here. I'm a big fan of anybody doing anything in the edtech space, but also particularly people interested in innovative ways of supporting learning. That could be using AI. It could be, in particular, helping people to learn from each other. I think there's a great untapped resource in most organizations, which is people. The stuff that people have in their heads, we're not tapping into it. From what I understand, that's something you're doing, Vince, and I'm really happy to have a conversation and to learn also more about what you're doing, as well as just me talking about what I happen to think about stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you. There's a question I'd like to ask guests when they first join, which is your motivation. So you say you're a researcher in learning and development. It seems like you're a convener with your Learning Technologies Conference. Can you share a little bit more what motivates you to be in the field of learning in these roles?
Like a lot of people who do this stuff, I've got a background of people who were in teaching, and also in my case in psychology as well. So my grandmother was a teacher, my mother was a teacher of various sorts, and also my grandfather was a teacher as well, and in fact their parents were teachers. So it goes quite a long way back, and I've got a book from my great-grandfather from the school he ran at the end of the 19th century, talking about what it was like trying to get the kids to learn when it was harvest time, and how difficult it was because the kids were all being taken out to go and work in the fields. And the effect that education had on people's lives in the late 19th century was very significant. I think that we have an equivalent impact that we can have on people's lives today, but it's not education, it's helping people learn well and reflect and develop themselves. It's a different approach, but it's as impactful, and that's something I want to be part of. So that's where it comes from. In addition to that, my mother was an educational psychologist and my sister an educational psychologist. So we've got I grew up in a household where learning and thinking about how you learn was taken very seriously. And I suppose it's just a natural progression from that.
Got it. Can you actually dive a little bit more into the distinction you just made? That it's less about education now, but about helping people learn. I'd love to hear more what you mean by that.
Education's important. Education is the stuff we do at school, college, university, where we learn things in a pretty formal setting. And I'm not down on that. I think it's incredibly important. Even as adults, when we get older, formal education can be very important. I myself take quasi-formal lessons in languages at the moment. I go in, there's somebody else who's the expert, and I'm working with them to develop myself. But at the same time, there's a lot that we can do outside that to develop ourselves well. That can come in particular from learning from our experiences and from ourselves, and also learning from other people. A great deal of the wealth in organizations, the value they have, is stored up in people's heads, and we don't tap into it. And yet you could be working next to a couple of people who can help you tremendously in what you do, and maybe they only increase your productivity by 5%, but a 5% increase in productivity might not seem much to you, but actually in terms of your output is huge, and especially when it compounds over the year. So what we need to do, I think, in organizations is help people understand and work together to boost each other's learning. So it could be the content, they could develop skills, they could develop a sort of understanding of something which they don't apply, but it gives them a better sense of how they should be using what they already know. And all of those things are less likely to be taught in formal learning, much more likely to be learned informally from the people you work with. What the learning and development function, which used to be the training function, traditionally has not done is support people in that business of understanding how we learn and actively sharing things with other people. We need to get to the stage whereby that's much more of a role for learning and development. And it's much more understood to be important by individuals and also by managers. The managers are crucial because they determine how people spend their time. Vince, I'm sorry, this is a podcast. People don't want to hear one guy talking for too long, but you can tell I feel passionately about this stuff, and I could talk about it all day long. So just interrupt me and shut me up when I've gone on too long.
No, I love it, but I love it, by the way. And as you know, it's also something that we deeply believe in. So it resonates deeply as I listen to it.
Well, what's your experience, Vince? What's your experience then in what you're doing and how this works? It resonates with you. How are you seeing this sort of thing actually come to life in organizations?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think from our end, I see two sides. One, I think, is the human to human interactions gets people want to learn. Like it makes them want to put in the effort to learn something new, which I think is actually a pretty difficult battle in most organizations where people are very busy with their day-to-day tasks, and learning can fall down the priority list, right? It's like a longer term thing that is important, but it never feels like quite that urgent. Yeah. The second piece I would say is then you also, to your point, when you learn with other people, what I'm seeing is I think people just develop more, almost maybe more neural connections. Like they hear how other people are seeing things, and they hear what their experience is, and the impact of hearing your colleagues and their work, how they're approaching work. I feel like that leaves a stronger impression for the learners and helps them synthesize their experience deeper. So definitely see the learning experience feeling a lot richer.
There's a lot in that. I love that idea that it gives us greater context, and because of our theory of thought, that we're able to consider not just ourselves but how other people are experiencing things. So if we are theory of mind, if we are able to think about other people at the same time as thinking about ourselves doing something, probably it does make it a richer experience thinking about it, and therefore we develop more neural pathways, associations, while we're learning something. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. It's a great idea.
It also just feels like, and by the way, this would be a really great segue to the whole concept of AI, because it's interesting, right? Because for me, part of it is that we're social beings. Like that's our instinct of humanity, and we've developed as a species by learning how to communicate orally with each other, and then that really helping us develop like bigger brains and build civilization. So it's very much built around human-to-human communication to learn. So I think that's what we're currently talking about. Now we have this new technology that is increasingly better at mimicking human behavior and communication. And so I'm very curious actually for your thoughts. How do you see AI's ability to tap into this? Actually, I don't even think that's a very well-formed question. But there's a general question of, will AI be that effective? And if so, in what way? Let me just pose this very unstructured question at you and see what you come back with.
So I'm a firm believer that AI is going to be transformative. And I don't say that in a light way. I've chaired the Learning Technologies Conference for 25 years. I'm very used to people stepping onto the stage and saying, this is the big thing. And then next year, somebody else comes up and says, no, this is the big thing. I think it's one of three things that's going to be huge. That I've seen in my lifetime. So personal computing, the dawn of that in the 1980s, the World Wide Web, invented in 1989, 1990, sort of coming to fruition in the 2000s, and now AI. But AI is, people have experienced ChatGPT, but AI is a whole lot of different things. It's a blanket term for a lot of different things. And I'm going to use the term AI, but although most people will hear it and think of generative AI and ChatGPT in particular, it does encompass all these other things. And it's almost better to think of it as being a blanket term for a series of ways that we use smart algorithms, which have been developed actually by people thinking about things very intensely for a number of decades. So smart algorithms in combination with really cheap processing power, which people don't consider, but actually that's crucial to the whole element. You can just churn through stuff more, combined with huge data sets. So you have large language models, which are formed on the corpus of almost the entire written works of English for the past, let's say, 2 centuries. So that's an enormous corpus of work to work on. It's a huge data set. So a large language model is one example of how AI can be used, or ChatGPT based on large language model is a one example of how AI can be used. So, but taking it as a whole, AI can be transformative because it's got this ability to handle large amounts of data in ways that we simply can't do as human beings, to do things that we can't do. Now, one of those things that you might say, well, I've seen that video of Sal Khan with his son with GPT-4o, and it looks amazing. It looks like they've got a tutor. Yeah, it does. But, one of the issues with that is one example that was almost certainly scripted. I'm not saying it was fixed, but it was almost certainly scripted because you wouldn't want a demonstration not to work properly. And we know from working with large language models that they can be sometimes absolutely brilliant and sometimes give you a completely erratic answer that makes no sense at all. And the problem with that is not only are they inconsistent, but you don't know how inconsistent they are. You don't know if they're right 95% of the time or 55% of the time. So if you're saying, yes, I'm going to make AI tutors available to everybody, that's probably a bad idea because you're going to end up with tutors producing a lot of really probably bad advice if they're based like that was on one particular large language model. On the other hand, it is absolutely possible to have a coach based on a much smaller data set, but really highly refined on it, to coach people on how to develop their skills in delivering support to somebody on a customer phone line, right? Now, I've seen this happen. I've seen the numbers associated with it, and one of the examples we had around this was published in the report AI and L&D from Talk to Action, which Egla Vinascalta and I published in April, which just looks at how HSBC, a bank in the UK, uses a commercial coach model to do exactly that and get qualitatively superior results from their agents. And we're talking about hundreds, thousands of people doing their job better as a result of doing something which it's a machine. It's working with a machine, which is a coach that has been trained on transcripts from this organization. You're a call center. You have thousands of hours of conversations recorded. You make the transcripts. You train the model on it. The model says, right, well, you tell them these are the good ones, these are the bad ones. The model prompts the person in training as to what works, what doesn't work when they're being onboarded. They have some extra training on particular things they need to work on. And then afterwards, when they're on a live call with a client, the program produces live, or if you prefer it, afterwards, coaching on what they did well and what they didn't do well. You said this, you could have tried this, or whatever. Now, what that is doing is something which an individual human can do, but you can't do it at scale. You can't do that coaching at scale with individual humans. It's just way too expensive. What AI can do is it can take that data, we've got all these transcripts, and it can make sense of it in a way, because it's controlled and you know what the data is. It's not a large language model, it's a much smaller model. You've got the data and you're using that to prompt people in a particular way that you know, and it works at scale. Now, look, just very quickly, Vincent, I'll wrap up. I think that any new technology goes through 4 phases. You've got the original state. The next state is the amplification state. You did what you used to do, but bigger and louder. So if the original state is a transistor radio, the next stage is the ghetto blaster, the boombox. You're just doing the same thing as a transistor radio, but it's louder. Okay. The next thing beyond that is you do the old thing in a new way. So you go from a boombox to a Walkman. So you walk around with a Sony Walkman, you've got a cassette, but it's just for you, not for everybody else. You're not playing it loud, it's just for you. You're walking around. Actually, that's fundamental because it moves it from being communal to a personalized experience, as well as the technology. The behavior changes. You're doing the old thing in a new way. And then you do the new thing in a new way, which is the iPod. Your iPod is personalized like the Walkman, but it's different because everything's electronic. You don't actually own the music anymore. You're renting it. And suddenly, because everything's on the cloud, you have everything being communicated with other people. And the social effect of that is enormous. So we go from the original transistor radio to the iPod. We're doing new things in a new way. Right now, as I say, with that coaching experience that I outlined, that is just one example of being able to use that big data processing to help people learning, but it's just a boombox. It's just doing the old thing louder. What can we do when we start doing old things in a new way and then go beyond that and do new things in a new way? I've got some idea, but it's a bit difficult to really have a handle on it because, look, back in the 1980s when I was playing in my university and I was playing the same cassette over and over again until literally it wore out, I could have no idea about what an iPod was. I wouldn't be able to predict it. And so right now, it's very difficult to predict where we're going to go. That was a really long answer. We're supposed to be having a conversation, Vince, and I'm just dumping stuff on you. But does that make sense?
I would say you're sharing a ton of wisdom and insights. I'm like, very interesting. Yeah.
Okay.
There's so many careers we can go down from what you just shared, all of which I really loved. And I guess I'll make one comment on the thing you said at the end. And there's one area we can dive into perhaps. Yeah, so I totally agree that it's really hard to foresee like what is actually possible because it seems like when the old thing being in a new way happens, it's also a combination of a bunch of different like small innovations that come together. Some of it's business model thinking, some of it's user experience redesign, and some of it's actually layers of technology gets come together and suddenly a new thing is possible. So all of those things need to happen, and I think AI is probably not quite hit that stage yet.
Well, the other things, of course, that need to happen. You've got to have the technology, the superficial technology. I can make a cassette recorder really small. You've got to have the underlying technology, the infrastructure. I've got the whole distribution pattern that enables cassettes to get to people. Or in the case of the iPod, we've got the World Wide Web, and we can put stuff in people's living rooms, which you couldn't do before. But ultimately, the thing always changes things is, are people ready to behave in a new way? That's always the things that makes people lag. I remember in 1999 being with people at Microsoft and talking to them and them saying, this was in the UK, them saying, yeah, we're ready for e-Christmas. I said, what, e-Christmas? What do you mean? Well, we think that e-commerce is finally at the stage where we're going to get people to buy stuff online. This is 10 years after the invention of the World Wide Web. So in 10 years' time, wouldn't we have expected it to spread to every home? No. It was maybe 5 to 10% of people had World Wide Web access in the home, even then, 10 years afterwards. And e-Christmas was a total flop. People didn't buy stuff online. Now, 2024, people are buying stuff online all the time. You don't even think about it. The problem isn't the technology, which was there. The problem was the people's behavior. They just weren't ready to buy stuff online. And that will be the biggest drag on AI. And I'm not beating people up about that. A lot of the time people say, we've got these Luddites holding us back. Well, if people are concerned about security and using their credit card online to buy something in 1999, maybe we should take that seriously. And if people have got concerns about AI, let's not rubbish them. Let's take those concerns seriously and deal with them because maybe they've got a point. There's definitely something there.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, to your point, seeing when I talk to our clients, the biggest challenge being change management and adoption of AI. While there are studies of really successful pilots in pockets, when you talk to enterprise leaders, I haven't yet heard someone say, "Yeah, like our teams are widely using it. We're seeing like widespread productivity gain." They usually say we have 5% that's maybe using it pretty actively, and then there's middle 80 that kind of have tried maybe once or actually don't even really care, right? And there are some that are actively against it or like really worried about it. I think the distribution is important, but the fact that there's huge this middle that is, like trying to and not yet successfully adopting AI is sort of an opportunity and a challenge, I would say.
Completely. And by the way, that is. I mean, you're familiar with the distribution. You know about Everett Rogers' distribution of innovation curve. This is completely normal, and it's a fact in many things in life, not even just technology. So we have to expect it. By the way, in the future, everyone will look back and say they were an early adopter. Everyone was all over it for sure. Nobody's going to say they thought it was rubbish, but we can't change that. When you're talking about the change management thing, Vince, in your experience, what is it that people are concerned about that's holding them back, and how do you help people overcome that?
Yeah, it's actually something we're now actively working on, at least from my end. So okay, so there's definitely something related to security and all of that, and but that to me is more of an institutional concern, right? That executives think about, and you work with your IT engineering team and so on to figure that out. But I think the challenge that I hear more often is the bottom up behavior change of individual employees adopting the technology. And from what I've seen or what I've heard is that AI is a bit of a very general tool where the use cases are not actually that obvious, and it's deceptively simple, but that also means you could be fooled to thinking, oh, I'd use it correctly, and it just doesn't work, right? Because so I think there's a combination of people. So people don't naturally think about, oh, I should use AI in this case, unless they are wired to really think like that. And most of us aren't. Even myself don't. I feel like I'm underusing the tool despite talking about these things. And then when you do it, like you have to persist. You're like, okay, you ask, and you're like, okay, no, do it this way. No, this was too long. Like, make it more concise. And it's the brain actually the thing that you're exercising is much more. I think you wrote about this on LinkedIn recently, which I really agreed. You're like being a manager and you're coaching your team members with constant feedback to say, no, like that's not what great looks like. Fix it to be like this. No, this is still off, right? But that persisting is not natural when you're talking with a software, right? That's more natural if you're like talking to maybe a human. And so I think it's kind of that I hear. You're nodding, so you're probably hearing something similar, but I'm curious.
No, I totally agree. And yeah, what I wrote was this idea that we need to be people using AI in the future will be machinist managers. And a machinist is someone who's a very highly skilled machine operator. So it's not somebody who just punches buttons, but somebody who uses a lathe or a sewing machine and knows how to use these power tools, which are complicated really effectively to do a range of jobs. At the same time as being able to handle the machine, you have to be a manager doing exactly what you've just said. You've got to be able to act as a manager, not the human being, but with a machine. And it's not what we expect, because fiction tells us the robots of the future will be absolutely super intelligent overlords. But they're not. They're going to be people we have to chivvy along and coax to do a better job. And anyway, despite the fact we're not used to the idea from fiction, most people don't make very good managers. It's a tough job. And so we're requiring people actually to take on a whole new skill set. I think you say it very well. We're not used to the idea. One of the big things that I see, Vince, and you've touched on it, is that people have tried it once. They will have tried ChatGPT, never mind everything to do with AI. They will have tried ChatGPT 3.5. They would have done it 18 months ago. They had a mediocre result and they left it. And that's their experience, and they've tarred everything with AI as a result. Now, in terms of human behavior, that's quite natural and it's understandable. In terms of having to persist with developing a new understanding and skill to develop yourself for the future, it's just a bad idea. You've got to be tough at that and keep slogging at it. But most people are super busy. Most people don't have the time. I'm going to devote this August to one particular focused activity on working with AI. And that's, well, I'll read my email as well, but that's all I'm doing, right? And most people don't have time to do that. They've got their day jobs. I think the gap is going to be filled with AI for most people, with AI agents, those tools that use the general ability of AI to solve a particular problem. I think increasingly those will crop up, and then a few of them will get used, a bit like an application on your phone, to help you do something quite specific. And that's where we'll start seeing a more wider adoption of it. People won't even notice it. My analogy, it's not an original one, is that AI is like electricity. It's big, it's potentially a huge changer, it's dangerous. You don't want to play with electricity in the bath. But at the same time, it's potentially very powerful. But nobody thinks, oh, I'm going to use electricity today. You plug in your radio, you plug in your laptop, and it works. And we don't really care about whether it uses AC or DC to get from the power station to our house and all the technical details. We just know some of the basics about it and we use the tool. I think that's what we're going to see in future, AI agents being the face of AI.
Got it. So when you say agents, I think, is it fair to say, like, your vision of where this is going is probably less of a very generalist chat interface like ChatGPT, where you're almost having access to a much more like base level version of the thing, rather than that, people having a lot more specialized, almost more vertically integrated AI agents or tools that can do stuff more end to end. And you are almost able to fully delegate certain kinds of tasks to it. So is that how you're thinking about it?
Yes, although I wouldn't necessarily say you fully delegate it. I think it's always going to be dangerous to get the AI to arrange your, I don't know, kids' soccer practice or whatever you wanted to get it to. And you find, bizarrely, you're being woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning because AI made a mistake with time zone changes or something. So I think you've always got to check it. But yes, the point about your AI agents is that they can get on and get off and do stuff, and they require much less input from you. And you might even have AI agents talking to other AI agents, either to do jobs for you or to interact on your behalf with somebody else. I just had a conversation on the phone with somebody who was super effective as in a customer support capacity for Transport for London. I phoned up, I said, look, this thing isn't working. They fixed it for me immediately, but they were able to fix that because they were working with the software system in the background. Now, in the future, not very far in the future, it could well be that I'll phone up and I'll speak to somebody. It won't be a person. It'll be an AI agent with a voice interface that will enable exactly the same interaction to be had as that person was doing. That person was pushing buttons on a keyboard to make something happen. A computer can do that. An agent can do that. So I would be very surprised if we weren't much. Initially, it will be a surprise, and then very rapidly, it'll become completely normal that we're talking to somebody that sounds like a person, but it's a bot, and it's handling some basic routines for us.
Yeah. What you're sharing reminds me a lot of the transitions that people struggled the most when they were going from an associate to a manager at McKinsey. Um, you learn how to become an orchestrator, and one of the things that you are told is your job is not to do the work, it's get the work done. It's very different, but like the orchestrator skills is hard to describe. But someone made this analogy, and this is how I learned the skill. They said you're a manager who has to juggle 5 balls, and at any given point in time, you kind of have to make sure that all 5 things are moving forward. But you're actually not really doing any of the 5 things, right? Like, actually, you have people who are doing that with you. You have team members who can help that with you, and in fact, you're the manager, but your partner is one of the balls that can do stuff for you. You have to tell them what to do. But that mindset shift took people time to get there, and myself included. And so as you talk about this, I really think about us juggling AI agents that are going to be doing a whole bunch of different specific tasks. And then you, as the person using the AI agents, really need to know, what did I delegate to the different people, and what's the frequency at which I need to check them to make sure their quality of outputs is right, or they're not making critical mistakes, right? So it's a kind of an interesting, that's the thing that it reminds me of.
I love it. I think that's a great way of describing it. And just consider how alien that is to most people, how difficult it is to do. I mean, I'm not talking about physical juggling, which is difficult enough, but the keeping all these things in the air. I was talking to somebody recently who does stuff with his hands. He was a chief learning officer for a very large company. He was responsible for the learning of 350,000 people. He still does really important stuff, but he also does a lot of stuff with beekeeping. And you do beekeeping, you just have to get your hands physically on something. And we came to the conclusion that there's a series of steps where we've gone further and further back from the natural human way of engaging with the world, which is to put your hands on something to make something happen. By the way, that's almost certainly why the juggling analogy is so vivid, because you're doing something with your hands. So let's say you're doing something with your hand with a drill first, a hand drill. Okay, that's fine. One step back, you're using a machine drill to do that. You're actually less engaged with the wood, but over time, you have the same experience as the person with the hand drill. You understand what different types of wood are like, how they respond to you. You take a step back from that using a lathe, which is a big machine. You're farther removed from that. You take a step back from the lathe, you're using a CAD machine to design what can happen on the lathe. And one step back from that is working with a team of people who are doing the CAD. They're doing the marketing. They're doing something else. They're doing something else. You are at least 5 steps back from that natural human way of interacting with the world, of putting your hands on something and doing something. That's what you're describing, this business of we're going to be in charge of working with almost intangible things to make things happen. And it's going to be difficult for people. Now that, and we're talking about the human behavior change that has to happen, we're trying to turn people into what I call machinist managers or 5-ball jugglers, which I think is a great way of putting it. Nobody's talking about that. We're all talking about, will our robot overlords be nice to us? I think it's all about human behavior. That's where we need to start.
Yeah. This is, you know what though, for me, like as I talk about this and sort of make this connection, the thing that actually gives me some optimism is that for me, at least personally, that transition from an associate to manager was one of the most rewarding and fulfilling. I I learned to love my job a lot more when I became a manager, because in some sense, I personally didn't love doing all the tasks myself. But I like that as a manager, you're constantly engaging more strategic part of your brain, and you're actually doing a lot more influencing, like talking to people, leading, right? And so that hopefully is what people say when they talk about, can AI create a more fulfilling kind of workplace for the rest of us? Now, I have a question for you, because this is something that I've chatted with different people about that I think is a real concern, and I'm not sure how we'll get really resolved, which is, okay, for me, in my work experience, for me to become a good manager, I had to go through the periods of doing the thing myself, because I have to build a pattern recognition to say, okay, this output is good, or this output is kind of mediocre, and you got to push more, right? The challenge with AI, as you're nodding, is how do you build a judgment when you never get to really do it yourself, or doing it yourself is honestly just less efficient, and there's a lot of pressure to do work faster and faster, so you always abdicate the responsibility of doing to the machine. I'm curious how you think about that, and maybe it has to be solved through some sort of learning, but I wonder your perspective about it.
Let me give you a classic case where this is happening in the legal profession, or at least let me just see if I'm correctly understanding your question. In the legal profession, classically, people have come through and they're super bright people. They go to a good university, they study law, they do stuff afterwards, they pass an exam, and then they come to this big swanky office, and their first job is just going through piles of documents for week after week after week in order to research the case law in the discovery phase of some case, right? And they all hate it. But in that process, they do that business that I was talking about earlier, putting their hands on the wood and feel what it's like and get the sense of, how is ash different from pear, different from oak? What is one case like? How do different judges act, and so on? The same thing. And if you don't have that experience, how do you then develop the ability, based on all that, to go on and be a super carpenter or a super lawyer? I'm not sure I've got an answer for it, Vince. This is something I'm struggling with, and I'm not sure that we've ever seen anything like this in human history. Because normally I go back for some sort of analogy that gives me hope that there is a way around it. It may be, as you say, there's an education process that people need to go through for it. I know that it's something that the people in the legal profession have talked to me about, that they're concerned about, but they haven't found an answer to. Do you have the people you've talked to, do they have any great answers for it?
I've not found anyone with the great answers for it.
Mm.
I think
That worries me.
the only thing I've seen, okay, so this is again from a consulting example. So what did people do at McKinsey? So McKinsey a few years ago, so a long time ago they used to almost exclusively hire like business grads and really grow the talent in house. Now at a certain point, they said there's so much talent and experts out there, and we can't only rely on this talent pipeline. One of the things they started to do is laterally hire someone into the organization. Now, one thing they do, I'm not sure how successful it is. I think it's a pretty tough transition for a lot of people, is to bring a partner level person from another place. But when they bring a partner level person, they actually do something interesting, which is the partner level person first need to be an associate on the project, then be a manager, then be right. Like they need to like work up the ladder to get there almost intentionally, right? So they learn how it works. Now, I don't know if they're given enough time, frankly, to fully master it. And I've seen challenges of people struggling with the cultural difference and so on. But I could imagine companies will have to become really intentional about creating stepwise progression inside their organization. So they don't just bring in a bunch of new grads and say, hey, like do this work, use ChatGPT. And then there's no actual, pathway to building the judgment to be a leader. Because I think you run the risk of running a company that's basically run by AI's mediocre outputs, and like no one really holding the bar on what good looks like.
I love that as a phrase. I think you describe it really well, and I think it is a risk. But perhaps you've also pointed to the antidote, which is we get organisations to take the skilling of people seriously, explicitly, rather than it being an implicit byproduct of the activity you give them. Right, great. You've got to read through these documents in an 80-hour week, and you've got to do that for 16 weeks. Okay, that's one way of getting to a result, but perhaps we could organise something which is a different way of doing it. And it might be, if you think about adaptive learning programs, that there are adaptive learning programs, also person-to-person learning programs, which you can instigate, which would enable people to get through that very painful process more effectively than having to. I mean, because let's face it, if you spend 6 hours reading through documentation, I mean, obviously the partners are going to say, wow, that's how I did it. They should learn the same way. But it's not very efficient. Maybe there's like a core of stuff they do in 20 minutes in that 6 hours or 8 hours or whatever that's actually valuable. Well, let's find that and make an explicit learning program out of that. And it doesn't have to be a content-driven learning program. It's much more likely to be something which is part of a discovery process, but is managed probably by some AI platform that is adaptive as you're going through it to what you're learning, prompts you and guides you towards a better way of understanding what it is you're supposed to be doing. I think, Vince, we've just cracked a problem there. I think we've done it.
Yes, we're ready. I guess one question as you talk about this that comes to my mind is, I mean, you said you're hearing folks from the legal profession, for example, they voices worries. So one challenge I see with this is that this problem is pretty long term. Like it's not one of this like burning problem. If I don't solve it tomorrow, it's a problem. It's a leadership pipeline problem, right? Like it's fine this year. It might have been fine for a couple of years, but okay, if all of your new hires are just using ChatGPT, like you're gonna have very few people who are capable of being a great manager and like a VP and executive. So do you have any thoughts on what companies might do to prioritize this problem as actually something to be solved?
Companies that will prioritize it, those have the combination of a leadership that gets it and a sense of scrappiness that they want to fight to be the top. I think it's unlikely to be the top organisations. I might be wrong, but I think it's more likely to be the organisations that say, right, we're a fairly young organisation, we're fairly new, we're good. This is going to give us an opportunity in 10 years to be resurgent. If you think about the oil and gas industry, the oil and gas industry demographic is tied historically to the price of a barrel of oil. So when the price of a barrel of oil slumped, something like 15 years ago, there was no recruitment into the industry. So now what's happening is we've got a bunch of guys, and it's mostly guys in their late 50s, they're all retiring, and there are insufficient people inside the oil and gas industry to take their places. And there's a real pinched waist coming up through the demographics, and it's a serious problem because they didn't take it seriously 15 years ago. So perhaps this is going to be the same for these companies. And I think the answer is you have some companies that have a long-term vision. They say, right, we're going to use this. We're going to scrap for our place in the future by taking this seriously now and build a talent pipeline. As you say, it's a talent leadership pipeline issue. So I could be completely wrong, of course, right? It may be that there are some august institutions that are very happy to say, to look at this and take it seriously. But the way they're structured, I think it's very difficult to imagine them saying that this is something they're going to take seriously as let's say I'm a 55-year-old to 60-year-old person at the top of this partnership, building something which is going to be valuable to the organization 5 to 10 years after I leave. It's difficult to see that.
Right. Got it. So I love that point, which is it seems like there's a mix of the industry, almost a dynamism of the environment they're part of, as well as the organization and
Yes. It's the same reason that small-scale legal practice in the UK, not now, I have to say, but even 5 to 10 years ago, we're using green screen, MS-DOS 3.1 word processing systems because they didn't need to change. There was no driver in the environment they were in to make them change. It's just on a much bigger scale.
You talk to so many organizations and leaders who think about this problem. Are there any organizations that stand out in your mind as being really great at creating a case for change and actually experimenting and being on the forefront of the sort of the AI shift? And if any come to mind, like what are they doing that makes them stand out?
One of the companies that comes to mind is Ericsson. So Ericsson have for some time been doing a transformational change that's taking them from being, well, it's an engineering company, obviously, but what they're doing is they're moving from being a company that is based on doing stuff the old way to something they're going to be a skills-based company. And at the heart of that, they're going to be running skills using an infrastructure that is going to affect everything in the organization. And they're going to be taking, from pre-boarding to onboarding to training people to talent mobility within the organization, which is all HR / L&D stuff. But in addition, how you hire, how you staff projects and everything, it's all going to be fed from skills. They will have other stuff as well, but skills will be a key part of doing it. Now, that's from the top level of Ericsson down. So they're doing a good job with it. And there are other organizations as well that are taking it seriously with AI. Ericsson's got a very good approach to AI, by the way. And again, this is a case study that's in the report that we brought out. They identify the work streams they want to look at, how we're going to use AI, and there are 4 work streams which will be affected. So it's not, we've got to check AI for everything. There's 4 discrete areas they're going to look at. They've got a team called the Learning Next team, which is a voluntary association of about 400 people, of whom about 10% are learning and development. They go out with the ideas. They say, right, okay, we need an action team to look at translation. Who can help us? And a group of 6 to 10 people get together. They look at something. They do experiments to see, will this work? Will it won't work for the Ericsson way? And then at the end of that, they decide, did we win? Did we fail? What was it like? They report back. There's no compunction, and there never should be with an experiment, to turn in a positive result. If you get it, if it doesn't work, great, you've discovered something. And then from this initial workstream constraint to the freedom of the experimentation in the middle, they come back to a constraint at the end. They have a decision process, which is I think really interesting. They say there are three things we can do. We can buy some technology to do this, let's say translation. We can build it ourselves, or we can wait. I think that last one is really interesting in a field like AI, which is moving so fast. You don't want to be jumping on the bandwagon, especially if you're an organization the size of Ericsson. You want to be able to just decide what you're going to do at the right time. And in plenty of cases, they've just waited. So that's one example of a company that's got a good methodology and that they're doing some good practical stuff with it as well. And with the skill stuff is driven at the heart of it by a taxonomy of skills that is produced using AI and is updated very regularly. And that's the trouble always with skills taxonomies, is the updating of it. So that's the core of how they make the rest of it happen.
That's a really great example and case study. And from the things you shared, the couple things that really stood out to me that are opinionated and different than like a general change management seems like the skills. It's almost there's a nomenclature and there's language and framework that's driving the conversation. And then the idea that they actually find those people who are just interested in AI almost, because they're forming these groups. So the leadership has defined core areas to focus on, so they're not going crazy, but they're harnessing bottom-up energy and excitement of the few 10% early adopters in the organization.
Exactly. And they come from a range of different disciplines. So it could be marketing, could be engineering, whatever. So you get a really good fertilization of different experiences.
That's cool. That's cool. Maybe I have two last quick questions for you. The first one is, what do you think is the biggest hype about AI that people are talking about? And every time you see it, you feel this is not the right direction.
I'm going to say something reasonably controversial. Okay, and I could be completely wrong. People are saying 2024 will be the year of AGI, artificial general intelligence. So what we have at the moment is AI that's applicable to specific things. Okay, but general intelligence, wow, it's just like a human being but smarter. I am deeply skeptical that this is attainable, and I can't explain why. I would say firstly, though, that intelligence is very difficult to define, and it may be impossible to say if we ever reach AGI. But I feel also that our view of what machines can do has been altered by the large language models we've come across. They clearly do things which are extraordinary, but they are not, as far as I can see, and other people have different opinions, they're not exhibiting anything like consciousness or the ability to think sensibly about something. So now, perhaps that'll be possible in the future. At the moment, the feeling is if we give it enough data, if we give it enough processing power, we can create AGI. I am deeply skeptical we'll ever get there. I think we're on an asymptotic line. We're on a curve that's getting closer and closer and closer to the line of AGI, but we'll never actually reach it. And that gap between where we are and human level general intelligence, that gap is where human beings make the difference and provide the differentiation. And I think they always will do. I think for me, technology always starts as a differentiator, but ends as a commodity. So it starts as something which gives you an edge, then other people catch up. And I think that AGI is never going to get to us. So we shouldn't wait to it. We should be looking always for how do we add value on top of what AI does today in order to make the most use of it. So that's the first question.
Got it. No, I love that. But yeah, and I agree with your view, by the way, also. The second question I would say is, what are you most concerned about with AI that you don't think people are talking about enough?
Well, I think actually, to be fair, most of the concerns around AI have been pretty well voiced. The fact that AI is imperfect and can produce imperfect results. A lot of people talking about the ecological effects of the huge amounts of energy required to run large language models, for example, is, I think, fairly well versed. If there is a problem with AI that I would point to, it is probably that there are too few people involved in making decisions at the top around what direction AI is going to go in. And so something that is potentially utterly transformative for the world seems to be under the control of a handful of people and not regulated, or, well, not, it is now regulated, but there is no sense that regulation is stopping development. Now, that may not be a problem. Perhaps we can rely on people's good natures and altruism to make sure that AI is being used in the best ways for humanity. We don't know that. And I'm a great believer in checks and balances, which is why if you look at politics, we have all these convoluted ways of ensuring that you've got two houses in a system of government, and you've got an executive, and you've got a judiciary, so that no one part of that can step off and do something crazy and without being controlled by the rest of it. I kind of think we don't have that set of governance and control when it comes to the world of AI and tech. It may not be a problem. But if there's one thing that concerns me, which I don't think many people are talking about, that would be it.
I love that sort of the risk, and I totally agree with you. It's also, I wouldn't necessarily say that folks who are really kind of leading the charge are incentivized to invite checks and balances.
No, they're not.
The stable equilibrium here right now isn't more checks and balances. Like, it needs to be actively worked on to get there. And so, such a great point around governance and just the structure. Don, this was awesome.
It was a hoot.
Yeah, I had so much fun talking about it, and there are certain connections I made that I'm gonna take away and work on it as part of Sparkwise. Ping you to get your thoughts on it. Yeah, thanks for sharing your thoughts here.
You know, I always say that the thing that gives me the greatest pleasure in life is a good conversation. So thank you for, I did too much talking, but thank you for a great conversation. Next time, I'll do the questions, you can do the answers, and we'll redress the balance. There we go.
That's good. Thanks, Don. Have a good day.
You too.